In early 1942, the United States Navy faced a logistical nightmare. As American forces expanded across the Pacific, engineers confronted an urgent question. How could they build reliable shelters that could withstand storms, bombs, and suffocating heat, yet be shipped flat, assembled quickly, and erected by untrained soldiers? Barracks were too heavy, tents too fragile, and wooden huts too scarce for the jungles of Guadalcanal or the coral plains of Tarawa. What the Navy demanded bordered on impossible: a portable building strong as a fortress, light as a tent, and practical as a box. The answer began on a cold January morning at Quonset Point, Rhode Island. Inside a converted hangar, engineers from George A. Fuller Company gathered around crude sketches, each line drawn under the relentless pressure of war. They had been given just 60 days to create a universal structure that could be mass-produced, shipped anywhere in the world, and assembled by men with no construction background. Their guiding principles were simplicity, strength, and speed. Within days, the first prototype began to take shape. A semicircular steel shell anchored by wooden end walls, a form inspired by ancient Roman archways, yet built with modern materials and precision. The design's brilliance lay in its geometry. The curved, corrugated steel sheets distributed weight evenly across the arch, allowing it to withstand high winds, torrential rain, and even near-miss explosions. Each component could fit inside a standard cargo hold, while the hut itself could be erected in less than a day, using only hand tools. When tested at the Seabee training base, 6 men assembled the entire structure before sunset, astonishing the observing officers. By March 1942, the Navy had approved full-scale production, naming the structure after its birthplace, the Quonset hut. What began as a desperate wartime experiment was already evolving into one of the most iconic engineering achievements of the 20th century. As factories from Rhode Island to California roared to life, America's new portable fortress was ready to face storms, bombs, and jungles alike. By the summer of 1942, Quonset huts were rolling off assembly lines faster than the Navy could assign serial numbers. Trains carried the curved steel panels, lumber ends, and bolts to ports on both coasts, where they were stacked in flat bundles for shipment. Each complete hut fit neatly into a wooden crate, weighing barely 6 tons, light enough for cargo ships or transport aircraft. Engineers called it the building in a box, a revolutionary concept for a military that once struggled to house men in wooden barracks that took weeks to construct. When the first shipments arrived at Noumea and Espiritu Santo, Seabees wasted no time proving the concept. Working knee-deep in tropical mud, under the roar of aircraft engines and the drone of mosquitoes, they unpacked, sorted, and built. Within 10 hours, a fully functional Quonset hut stood ready, arched, weather-sealed, and cooler than the humid air outside. It resisted typhoon winds, shed rain like a roof of armor, and reflected sunlight off its galvanized skin. Commanders, amazed by the efficiency, ordered hundreds more before the first test hut's floorboards had even dried. On Guadalcanal, where Japanese bombers regularly strafed Henderson Field, the huts became symbols of resilience. Shrapnel scarred their steel panels, yet few collapsed. Marines slept soundly through tropical deluges that once soaked their tents, while mechanics used modified huts as workshops, hospitals, and radio centers. Their modular interiors allowed endless customization. One became a mess hall, another a chapel, another a surgical ward. As production expanded, factories introduced 3 standardized widths, 16, 20, and 40 feet, allowing designs to adapt to nearly any mission. Each hut required no foundation, no heavy machinery, and no skilled carpenters. The simplicity was elegant, but its effect was profound. For every new island captured, the Quonset hut became the first sign of permanence amid chaos. By the end of 1942, more than 10,000 huts had been shipped worldwide, from North Africa's deserts to Alaska's frozen coasts. What began as a humble engineering experiment had become the backbone of Allied infrastructure, proof that genius, in wartime, often arrived not with grandeur, but with bolts, arches, and determination. When the Quonset huts reached active combat zones in 1943, theory collided with the brutal realities of war. The South Pacific offered no mercy. Typhoons tore through bases, bombs cratered airstrips, and heat turned metal to fire. On Guadalcanal, engineers watched in disbelief as huts built days earlier faced a Category 4 storm that shredded traditional structures to splinters. Yet when dawn broke, the curved steel shelters still stood, battered but unbroken, their corrugated ribs dispersing the wind like armor plates. That morning, the design earned the respect of every man who survived beneath it. At Tarawa, where Japanese artillery rained nightly, the huts faced a new trial. Shrapnel pierced walls, fires erupted, and debris filled the air. Still, the arched framework deflected shock waves that would have leveled flat-walled buildings. Seabees quickly learned to reinforce them with sandbags or dig half into the ground, creating semi-buried fortresses that withstood both heat and blasts. Medical staff worked within them even under shell fire, treating wounded Marines while the steel above rang from explosions like a drum of endurance. On Iwo Jima, the huts became laboratories of adaptation. Their reflective metal exteriors turned the volcanic island's blazing sunlight into a furnace, forcing engineers to experiment with insulation made from shredded palm leaves, canvas liners, and even repurposed parachute silk. Despite the intense conditions, their interiors remained dry and structurally intact, offering the only semblance of shelter amid ash and smoke. Mechanics used them to repair engines, pilots slept in them between sorties, and chaplains held services beneath their curved ceilings, the echoes blending with distant artillery. The structure's success inspired rapid refinements. Reinforced ribbing increased blast resistance, and adjustable vents allowed airflow in tropical climates or heat retention in Arctic cold. Each battlefield demanded evolution, and the hut adapted like a living organism, simple yet unyielding. By war's end, every innovation was field-tested under fire, every improvement paid for in sweat and courage. Through relentless trial and destruction, the Quonset hut proved its worth as more than mere shelter. It was a survivor's machine, a design forged not in laboratories but in the crucible of war itself. By mid-1943, the Quonset hut had evolved from a clever prototype into one of the largest mass-produced structures in human history. What began at the Davisville Naval Construction Battalion Center in Rhode Island now stretched across hundreds of American factories, each synchronized in a monumental industrial rhythm. Sheet steel rolled off assembly lines in Pennsylvania, corrugated panels were stamped in Ohio, and crates of prefabricated arches left California's ports, stacked higher than the workers who built them. Every set of components, marked with numbered blueprints, could be assembled anywhere on Earth without specialized tools or training. The genius lay not only in its simplicity, but in its logistical perfection. Each hut required fewer than 10 men, no electricity, and could be raised within 24 hours by unskilled laborers guided only by a printed manual. These instructions were translated into over a dozen languages as production expanded to allied nations. On every shore where the U.S. military landed, from North Africa to New Guinea, the huts followed, like a shadow of steel accompanying the advancing front. Their curved geometry allowed cargo ships to pack thousands of square feet of housing within minimal volume, a miracle for wartime transport efficiency. The Seabees became masters of rapid construction, racing storms and enemy fire to erect entire bases within days. At Espiritu Santo, a record was set when 50 Quonset huts rose in 48 hours to house incoming medical units. Soldiers began calling them tin miracles, and their distinctive silhouette became a familiar comfort in an unfamiliar world. Even bombers returning from missions over the Pacific could spot the glinting arcs below, marking safety amid chaos. Factories refined production with astonishing speed. Engineers introduced interchangeable components, improved corrosion-resistant coatings, and standardized dimensions for medical, mess, and command variants. The modular nature of each unit turned the Quonset hut into the architectural equivalent of the Jeep, simple, reliable, and universal. Its success revealed a deeper truth. Innovation was not confined to laboratories but thrived in assembly lines where necessity commanded ingenuity. By late 1944, nearly 170,000 huts stood across the globe, sheltering millions of soldiers, doctors, and mechanics. The world had never seen such industrial unity, metallic proof that design could move as fast as war demanded. On the battered island of Guadalcanal, the Quonset hut faced its most unforgiving trial amid the wreckage of war. Monsoon rains lashed the coastline as Japanese bombers prowled overhead, searching for the silver arcs that dotted the American airfields. When the first raid struck, steel fragments tore across the encampment, but the huts, flexing under shockwaves, held their ground. The curved geometry that engineers had praised on blueprints now deflected blast waves, allowing the structures to absorb punishment rather than collapse. For soldiers who had known nothing but tents and mud, survival itself became the design's greatest validation. Inside, the temperature soared to unbearable levels, yet even in tropical heat, the Quonset's ventilated ribs and adjustable louvers allowed airflow that canvas could never provide. Improvised bamboo shades and sandbag reinforcements turned them into fortresses against both weather and war. Medical officers quickly realized their value. Hospital units reported that patients recovered faster under their steady protection, shielded from the chaos beyond thin steel walls. At Henderson Field, air crews returning from missions found refuge in these domed shelters, listening to rain hammering rhythmically against the corrugated arches. Mechanics used them as workshops, storing aircraft engines, fuel drums, and repair tools that could not be exposed to the jungle's corrosive humidity. Even after direct artillery strikes, many huts could be repaired overnight, their modular panels replaced as easily as armor plating. Their endurance saved equipment, lives, and morale, turning temporary shelters into silent comrades of the campaign. Across the Pacific, from Tarawa to Peleliu, the Quonset hut became as recognizable as the American flag painted on fuselages. Commanders wrote in field reports that the structures withstood cyclonic winds reaching 90 miles per hour without structural failure. Some were buried under camouflage netting and coconut fronds to evade detection, blending into the dense vegetation. The huts not only endured, they adapted, evolving into bunkers, chapels, classrooms, and operating theaters. For weary men far from home, these steel arches offered more than safety. They offered a sense of permanence amid impermanence. Under relentless bombardment, the Quonset hut proved that simplicity, executed with precision, could stand against both man-made destruction and nature's fury. As the war spread across continents, the Quonset hut transformed from a single military design into a family of architectural survivors. Engineers at Davisville Naval Construction Battalion Center faced an unending stream of requests from distant commands, each demanding modifications for environments no manual could anticipate. In the Aleutians, where freezing winds sliced through steel seams, crews lined walls with fiber insulation and fitted oil stoves to chase away sub-zero air. The same structure that baked under Pacific sunlight now defied blizzards on the rim of the Arctic Circle. In North Africa, Seabees confronted a different enemy, sandstorms that scoured everything in their path. By anchoring the arched frames deeper and coating panels with reflective paint, they transformed the huts into cool, dust-resistant shelters capable of surviving desert tempests. Meanwhile, in tropical bases like New Guinea and the Solomons, builders cut new ventilation ports into the arches and added raised wooden floors to prevent flooding during monsoons. Every variation carried the same DNA of efficiency, curved geometry distributing stress evenly, corrugations channeling heat and rain away. By 1944, the Navy's Bureau of Yards and Docks cataloged more than 100 official Quonset designs, ranging from compact medical dispensaries to 200-foot aircraft maintenance hangars. Some huts featured sliding steel doors wide enough to admit jeeps or bomb trailers, while others were split-level, with raised offices and bunk rooms beneath one continuous shell. Their prefabricated nature allowed ships to carry hundreds of tons of components efficiently, delivering shelter wherever the front advanced. Reports from the China-Burma-India theater noted that British and American engineers jointly modified Quonset structures into mobile radio stations and weather forecasting centers. On small atolls, they became command posts guiding amphibious landings, their domed profiles visible through smoke and chaos. The huts no longer served only as protection. They became instruments of coordination, logistics, and communication. Each adaptation reaffirmed a central truth. The Quonset hut's genius lay not in complexity, but in universality. With a few tools, minimal manpower, and absolute precision of design, it conquered climates, endured wars, and adapted across hemispheres. What began as an emergency shelter had become a global system, proof that perfect geometry could outthink the unpredictable violence of nature and conflict alike. They arrived without fanfare, men in stained dungarees carrying wrenches instead of rifles, but their impact would shape entire campaigns. The United States Navy construction battalions, known simply as the Seabees, became the living machinery that turned Quonset blueprints into reality. Their motto, "We build, we fight," defined the strange duality of their existence. Engineers who worked under shell fire, carpenters who fought in foxholes beside their creations. On beaches from Tarawa to Tinian, Quonset huts rose within hours of landings, their ribbed silhouettes gleaming against blackened skies. The Seabee's speed bordered on myth. Using prefabricated panels, they could unload, assemble, and anchor a complete hut in less than 24 hours. Photographs from Bougainville show crews hammering by flashlight while machine guns rattled in the jungle beyond. Every arc lifted became an act of defiance against chaos, a promise of order amid ruin. Some battalions built entire Quonset cities with hospitals, radio stations, bakeries, and supply depots connected by muddy pathways. Commanders often remarked that where the Seabees built, the war moved forward. The men learned through hardship that perfection required improvisation. When foundation bolts rusted in humid air, they fashioned replacements from truck axles. When shipments of steel were delayed, they cut sections from wrecked landing craft to finish frames. Even as bombs fell nearby, the work never stopped. Each hut completed meant lives sheltered, operations secured, and morale preserved. The Seabees took pride in the strange beauty of their structures, unadorned yet indestructible, temporary yet eternal in purpose. On Saipan, when a typhoon struck before the airfield was finished, the Seabees lashed Quonset frames together to form windbreaks, saving planes and men from annihilation. After the storm passed, they salvaged the same panels, straightened them by hand, and rebuilt stronger huts by dawn. Their resourcefulness gave the design its soul. It was never just a feat of engineering, but of endurance, faith, and unity. For those who slept beneath the curved roofs, the huts were more than steel. They were proof that humanity's will to survive could be forged in corrugated iron. The Seabees did not merely construct shelters. They built hope that withstood both time and terror. When the war's thunder finally receded in 1945, the Quonset hut remained standing, an unassuming monument to victory forged from steel and sweat. Across the shattered Pacific Islands, the curved silhouettes stood untouched amid ruins, their galvanized skin glinting under a peaceful sun. Soldiers packed their duffel bags and boarded ships home, but the huts they left behind began a second life, repurposed into schools, warehouses, and shelters for displaced families. Where jungle once swallowed battlefields, civilization took root under the same arches that had endured artillery fire and monsoon floods. In occupied Japan, American engineers used Quonset huts to house reconstruction offices and hospitals, transforming symbols of war into shelters of recovery. On Okinawa, thousands of locals found refuge inside those same structures that had once stored munitions and field rations. Their simplicity allowed them to be reborn endlessly, painted white for classrooms, partitioned with bamboo for temporary homes, or turned into chapels for the grieving. The curved form, once a military necessity, became an architectural language of renewal across continents. Back in the United States, the surplus huts flooded the market. Universities from California to Massachusetts purchased them to accommodate returning veterans under the GI Bill. Rows of Quonset classrooms appeared across campuses, housing lectures in engineering, literature, and history beneath the same metal arcs that had once echoed with the sounds of war. Students called them tin can colleges, Yet for millions rebuilding their lives, they symbolized opportunity and resilience. Even in civilian landscapes, the Quonset's shape carried the memory of endurance and adaptability. Throughout Europe, the huts became warehouses, churches, and community centers, serving as silent witnesses to recovery. In Britain, the Ministry of Works reused thousands for housing during the post-war shortage, their half-moon forms dotting the countryside for decades. Architects studying their efficiency recognized something profound. The Quonset hut had transcended function to become a philosophy of human persistence. Its steel ribs, once meant to outlast storms and bombs, now framed peace itself. From battlefield to home front, the Quonset stood unchanged in purpose, to protect, to endure, to serve. Through simplicity, it had achieved immortality, carrying within its arcs the unspoken spirit of a generation that refused to crumble. In the post-war decades, the Quonset hut quietly evolved from a military relic into a blueprint for the modern world's built environment. Its influence spread through architecture schools, engineering firms, and humanitarian organizations that recognized in its geometry the rare union of strength, simplicity, and scalability. Architects who had once fought under its shelter now returned home, inspired to adapt its logic for peace. They sketched airports, factories, and emergency housing with the same rhythmic arcs that once defined the front lines. In 1946, the United Nations Relief and Rehabilitation Administration adopted Quonset-style shelters for displaced families across Europe and Asia. Their pre-curved steel ribs and bolt-together panels made them perfect for regions stripped of infrastructure. Every shipment carried not just materials, but lessons in resilience, teaching local builders how to erect communities within hours. In India and the Philippines, modified huts became rural clinics and agricultural storage sites, their corrugated exteriors gleaming beneath tropical skies once again, this time not as invaders, but as instruments of renewal. The architectural world took notice. Buckminster Fuller's geodesic domes, Jean Prouvé's modular houses, and countless mid-century prefab designs borrowed principles born on Rhode Island's coast. The Quonset's DNA, lightweight framing, transportable sections, and climate adaptability, became the foundation for a new design philosophy that prioritized efficiency over ornamentation. Even in the atomic age, when concrete and glass reigned supreme, the humble corrugated arc remained an enduring symbol of practical genius. By the 1960s, civilian industries reimagined Quonset huts as workshops, churches, aircraft hangars, and even art studios. Their affordability made them irresistible during economic recessions, while their visual honesty appealed to modernists who saw beauty in exposed structure and function. In Alaska's oil fields and Africa's refugee camps, the same basic shape continued to rise, proof that wartime necessity had become universal architecture. The Quonset hut's journey mirrored humanity's own, forged in conflict, tempered by adaptation, and elevated through creativity. Its curved silhouette came to represent not just survival, but evolution, a quiet testament to how innovation born for war could end up rebuilding the peace it once defended. From temporary shelter to global design icon, the Quonset story had only just begun. 80 years after its conception, the Quonset hut endures as more than an artifact of war. It remains a living emblem of ingenuity shaped by necessity. Its corrugated arches stretch across deserts, tundra, and coastlines, standing as quiet monuments to the era when engineers, builders, and dreamers refused to accept the impossible. In every rusted bolt and curved panel lies the story of humanity's determination to create order amid devastation. What began as a desperate wartime experiment has become a universal vocabulary of endurance and simplicity, spoken fluently by generations of builders who never saw the battlefields that birthed it. Architects now study the Quonset not merely as structure, but as philosophy. Its perfect symmetry embodies balance between fragility and strength, permanence and impermanence. Disaster relief agencies continue to replicate its principles for shelters in earthquake zones and refugee settlements, carrying forward the same promise once delivered to soldiers beneath foreign skies. Each new adaptation honors the anonymous minds who forged its brilliance in 72 days under the pressure of global conflict. The hut's humble materials, steel, bolts, and sweat, became instruments of hope that outlasted the empire of war itself. For the men who built and inhabited them, the Quonset hut was more than shelter. It was testimony to unity and survival. The Seabees who hammered their frames, the engineers who refined their geometry, and the weary soldiers who slept beneath their curved roofs all contributed to an unspoken legacy of endurance. When the guns fell silent, those same arcs provided classrooms for learning, clinics for healing, and sanctuaries for rebuilding. The design's immortality lies not in its metal, but in the spirit it preserved through every storm, blast, and season of rebuilding that followed. Today, as architects envision habitats for Mars and sustainable cities on Earth, the ghost of the Quonset still guides their hands. Its lesson remains eternal, that the simplest form, born of crisis, can shelter the human soul as surely as it shelters the body. Beneath its timeless curve survives a legacy of steel and spirit, proof that even in war's darkest hour, creation can triumph over destruction.